I want you to do something for me for a second. Just, close your eyes. And I want you to conjure up an image of the American West.
Okay.
But not the real complicated history with the treaties and the land rights and the politics. I mean the myth, the movie version that lives in the back of your brain.
Right. We're talking tumbleweeds, high noon, dusty main streets, the whole cinematic package.
Exactly. And if I asked you to put a face to that entire era, the ultimate outlaw, the icon of frontier rebellion, who is the first person that pops into your head?
Oh, it has to be Billy the Kid, without a doubt.
It's always Billy. And I bet you aren't just picturing a name. You are picturing a very, very specific photograph. You know the one.
I do. He's standing there, looking a little scruffy, almost defiant. He's got that battered hat on, a waistcoat that's clearly seen better days.
And he's leaning sort of casually on a Winchester rifle.
That's the one. It is the defining image of that time. It's scrappy, it's unpolished, it has become the visual shorthand for the entire Wild West.
And here is the thing. Here's the aha moment right at the top. That image, the one we have slapped on lunchboxes and posters and history books for over a century, it is a lie.
That is a very heavy way to start, calling the most famous photograph in American history a lie.
But it is. And I don't mean it's a fake. It's a real photo, a real tintype. But the information it gave us, the one specific detail that launched 1,000 legends, including the Paul Newman movie, The Left-Handed Gun, was a technical error.
He wasn't left-handed.
Billy the Kid was not left-handed. The photograph, the technology itself, tricked the entire world for 100 years.
And that deception, that simple technical glitch, is exactly where we are starting our deep dive today. But we aren't just doing a history lesson on old cowboy photos.
No, we are going way, way deeper. We're looking at a project called Binary Interpretation of Billy the Kid by the digital artist Kenji Kojima. And this source, I have to say, it blew my mind because it takes this dusty piece of 19th century history and moves it through the absolute cutting edge of modern technology.
We are talking about encryption, algorithms, bitwise operations, and the very nature of digital reality itself.
So, it's a journey from the muddy frontier of New Mexico in 1880 straight into what Kojima calls the binary void of the internet.
And the mission here really is to understand the tension between two very different kinds of truth. On the one hand, you have material truth, the physical object, the thing you can hold.
The tintype.
And on the other, you have informational truth, the data that actually describes reality, because as we are going to find out, those two things are rarely, if ever, the same.
So settle in. We're about to deconstruct the most famous outlaw in history, pixel by pixel. But before we get to the code, we have to start with the hardware.
The hardware of history.
The source material calls this first section the tintype era. Now, when I say tintype, I think most people, myself included, just picture old sepia photo. But we need to be really specific here. What exactly is a tintype? Because the way this thing was made is the whole reason we got the history wrong in the first place.
Right. To understand the error, you have to understand the chemistry. In 1880, you didn't have rolls of film like Kodak. You certainly didn't have digital sensors. You had what's called the wet plate collodion process.
Okay. Wet plate collodion.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like something you'd find in a Frankenstein lab.
It basically was. I mean, you have to stop thinking of it as photography as we know it today. It was chemistry performed in the field under immense pressure.
And the tintype itself, or the ferrotype, I think is the technical term.
Correct. Ferrotype. It was an image struck directly onto a thin sheet of blackened iron or steel, not paper.
So it's literally a picture on a piece of metal.
It's a sheet of metal coated with a black Japanning lacquer. And this is where the character of the itinerant photographer comes in. This wasn't a studio artist sitting in a velvet parlor in New York City with perfect lighting.
No, these were pioneers.
They were absolute pioneers. These were guys packing wagons with heavy glass plates, extremely dangerous chemicals, bulky cameras, and then dragging them through the mud and the dust of the frontier.
I read in the notes that the itinerant photographer was basically the visual equivalent of the settler.
That's a fantastic comparison. They were exploring and mapping the visual landscape just as the settlers were exploring the physical one. But imagine the process for a second. You find a subject, say Billy the Kid, standing outside a saloon in Fort Sumner, New Mexico.
Okay.
You can't just click a button. You have to go into your portable dark room, which was usually just a tent or the dark back of a wagon, and you have to pour this syrupy liquid called collodion evenly across the metal plate.
And collodion is what exactly? I'm picturing something strange.
It's gun cotton, which is, you know, a key ingredient in smokeless gunpowder dissolved in ether and alcohol.
Molly, ether. the stuff that knocks you out, and gun cotton, which is literally explosive.
Precisely. It is highly flammable, gives off noxious fumes, and smells absolutely terrible. You pour this sticky explosive syrup on the plate, then you have to dip it in a bath of silver nitrate to make it sensitive to light.
Okay, this sounds incredibly dangerous.
It was, and here's the kicker, the part that gives the process its name. You have to do all of this. Rush the plate into the camera, take the picture, and then rush back to the darkroom to develop it before the plate dries.
So it's a race against the clock. That's why it's called wet plate.
If it dries, the chemical reaction stops, the silver salts crystallize, and the image is gone forever. You have maybe 10-15 minutes total from start to finish.
So when we look at Billy in that famous photo, he's not just posing patiently. He's standing there waiting for a guy who is frantically mixing explosives in a tent 10 yards away.
That's exactly right. It creates a different kind of tension in the image, you know? It's not a casual moment, but that very process is what leads us to the glitch, the one that changed history.
The left-handed thing.
Yes. In modern film photography, you take a picture, and it creates a negative image on the film. The light parts are dark, the dark parts are light. Then you take that negative into a darkroom and shine light through it onto photographic paper to create the final positive print.
Right, so there are two steps. And in that second step, the image gets flipped back to normal. Two flips make a right.
Correct. But the tintype is a direct positive. There is no negative. The light from the lens hits the chemically coated metal plate, reacts with the silver, and boom, that's your one and only image. There is no second step to flip it back.
So it's a mirror.
It is optically identical to looking at your reflection in a mirror. Everything on the right side of the subject appears on the left side of the photograph.
So physically, on that day in 1880, Billy the Kid was wearing his Colt Peacemaker on his right hip. He was holding that Winchester 1873 carbine in his right hand. But the camera, because of the direct-to-metal process, flipped it all.
And because nobody in the 1880s, or for that matter in the 1950s, when the myth was being cemented in Hollywood, stopped to think about the specific optical properties of wet plate photography, the world just accepted the visual evidence. Look, his gun is on his left hip. He must be the left-handed gun.
That's just amazing, isn't it? We trusted the technology so implicitly that we literally rewrote the biography of a human being to fit the limitations of the machine that captured him.
That is the core insight of this entire deep dive. Our understanding of American icons is built on the physical limitations of the technology used to capture them. We aren't really looking at Billy the Kid. We are looking at what the wet plate collodion process allowed us to see of him.
And we didn't figure this out for sure until much later.
Well, historians and firearm experts had their suspicions for a long time. The public myth was already set in stone. It wasn't until people started looking really closely at the details, like the loading gate on the Winchester rifle, which is always on the right side of the receiver, that they could prove definitively, wait a minute, that mechanism is on the wrong side of the gun. The photo must be reversed.
But by then, the legend was printed. Paul Newman had already starred in the movie.
Exactly. The lie had already traveled halfway around the world while the truth was still, putting on its boots.
Now, you'd think that knowing the photo is technically wrong would make it less valuable. Like a misprinted stamp, it's an interesting curiosity, but flawed. But no, this specific piece of metal it's incredibly expensive.
This is where we enter the cult of the object. We move from the world of chemistry to the world of economics.
In 2011, that original tintype, that little scratched, reversed, lying piece of steel, sold at auction. Do you know for how much?
I do. An astonishing $2.3 million.
$2.3 million. For a picture that is barely the size of a credit card and gets the single most famous fact about the subject completely wrong.
But that price tag has nothing to do with accuracy. It's all about scarcity. The source material for our dive calls this abnormal greed, which is a pretty strong phrase.
It is. But why abnormal? Greed in the art market isn't exactly a new thing.
I think the word abnormal is used because the value is derived entirely from the fact that it is the only universally authenticated photograph of Billy the Kid. It's not just a photo anymore, it's a relic. It's like a piece of the true cross for the mythology of the American West.
So the collectors, the people paying millions, they don't care about the informational truth, the fact that Billy was right-handed. They only care about the material truth.
Yeah.
That this specific piece of iron was physically in the room with him.
Exactly. The object becomes a financial vessel. It's a way to store wealth. It doesn't matter that the information it conveys is a distortion. It only matters that it's unique. And this obsession with the unique physical object is precisely what our artist, Kenji Kojima, is interrogating.
Right. Let's give it to Kojima. because he looks at this $2.3 million tintype, and he doesn't see a holy relic. He sees a data set that needs to be corrected.
Kenji Kojima's work, Binary Interpretation of Billy the Kid, is so fascinating because he doesn't just, open the image in Photoshop, click flip horizontal and call it a day. He creates an entire system. He built a 3-panel video installation to visualize this conflict between the myth and the reality.
Okay, let's set the stage for the listener. Imagine you're in a gallery. You're looking at a wide screen that's divided into 3 distinct side-by-side squares.
Right. On the left panel, and also in the center panel, you have the historical image, the mirrored version, the one everyone knows, the lie of the left-handed gun.
Okay, so 2 panels showing the myth. What's on the right panel?
On the right panel, you have the corrected image. Kojima has digitally flipped it. So now, for the first time in this kind of meaningful artistic context, you are seeing Billy as he actually stood that day, right-handed, gun on his right hip, the Winchester held correctly.
So you're literally looking at the lie and the truth side by side.
But it's much more than just a spot the difference game. Kojima is building what he calls a cognitive map. I mean, think about how we process information today. We are constantly toggling back and forth. We have the received wisdom, the myths we grew up with, and then we get the new data that contradicts it.
Like finding out George Washington didn't actually have wooden teeth, they were made of something else.
Exactly that. We are constantly flipping these images in our heads, trying to reconcile the old story with the new facts. Kojima is just externalizing that internal process. He's showing us visually the friction between the comfortable legend and the corrected, sometimes uncomfortable, reality.
And he does something really subtle with the quality of the images, right? Something with the pixels. They aren't all the same size across the 3 panels.
This is one of those details that just makes you realize how brilliant this artist is. In the installation, the 2 side panels, the global myth on the far left and the corrected truth on the far right, have pixels that are 4 times larger than the pixels in the center panel.
So the center image is sharper, more detailed, and the side images are blockier, less defined.
Relatively, yes. And the metaphor here is powerful. The center panel represents our desire for intimacy, for authenticity. When we look at a historical photo, what do? We want to zoom in. We want to see the scruff on his chin. We want to look into his eyes and see the soul of the outlaw. We crave high-resolution humanity.
But the side panels, with their bigger pixels.
The side panels represent the icon. As Billy the Kid travels through the network, as his image is copied, shared, and he becomes a legend, a movie character, a symbol on a t-shirt, he loses resolution. He becomes abstract.
He becomes a meme.
Perfectly put. He becomes a meme. A symbol. And symbols are, by nature, low resolution. It's so easy to project your own ideas about rebellion or freedom onto a blocky, low-res image. It's much harder to do that with a high-res, complex, flawed human being staring back at you.
That's a really powerful idea. The more famous you get, the lower your resolution becomes in the public consciousness. You stop being a person and you just start being a collection of pixels that represent rebellion or outlaw.
That's what Kojima calls the distance of history. We lose the nuance of the man, but we gain the power of the legend, and the legend is always, always low res.
Okay, so we have these 3 images, the myth, the intimate center, and the corrected reality. But Kojima doesn't just let them sit there on the screen. He starts applying what the source calls the mathematics of history.
This is where we leave the 19th century darkroom and enter the 21st century encryption lab. Kojima decides to encrypt the image of Billy the Kid using a technique called the one-time pad, or OTP.
Now, I hear encryption and I immediately think of, passwords for my bank account, or maybe the Enigma machine from World War II. But the source material calls the one-time pad the pinnacle of security. Is it really that special?
It is the white whale of cryptography. In theory, and in practice, if it's done correctly, the one-time pad is mathematically provably unbreakable.
I'm going to have to stop you there. Unbreakable is a huge word. We live in an age of supercomputers, of quantum computing on the horizon, of AI. Surely if you throw enough processing power at something, you can crack any code.
That's the common intuition, right? That every code is just a very hard puzzle waiting for a fast enough computer to solve it. But the one-time pad is different because of how it works. It doesn't rely on a complex but ultimately discoverable pattern.
Most codes use a pattern.
Almost all of them, yes. If I use a simple substitution cipher like A = 1, B = 2, there's an obvious pattern. Even incredibly complex modern encryption like RSA relies on the mathematical difficulty of factoring huge prime numbers. It's ridiculously hard, but it's a solvable math problem. A powerful enough computer can eventually crunch it.
So how does the one-time pad get around the supercomputer?
By using perfect randomness, imagine you have your message, in this case, the binary data of the Billy the Kid photo, all the ones and zeros, and then you have key. The key is a stream of truly random numbers that is the exact same length as the message.
Okay, so if the photo is 1,000,000 bits of data, the key is also 1,000,000 random bits.
Exactly. You then combine the message with the key using a simple process called an XOR operation. We don't need to get into the Boolean algebra, but the point is you are fundamentally mixing your meaningful message with pure patternless noise.
And because the key is random.
The output is also perfectly random. The encrypted message is pure digital static. It has no discernible pattern.
But hold on. If I'm a hacker, a code breaker, and I intercept that static, can I just start guessing keys until one of them works?
But that's the genius of it. You can guess a key. But because the original key was random, every possible decryption is equally probable. If you try to brute force it, one key you guess might decrypt the noise and show you the image of Billy the Kid. But another equally valid key might decrypt the exact same static and show you the Mona Lisa. And a third key will decrypt it into a page from Shakespeare.
Oh, I see. The math has no way of telling you which of the infinite possible answers is the right answer.
Precisely. Without the original one-time use key, the encrypted data is mathematically indistinguishable from random static. There is no pattern, no foothold for the computer to latch onto. It is perfect secrecy.
So Kojima applies this unbreakable spy-level encryption to the pixels of Billy the Kid. What does that actually look like on the screen in his artwork?
It's genuinely haunting to watch. In the first video of the series, you watch that sharp, high-resolution center image, the one where we wanted to see his soul, and it literally dissolves. It doesn't just blur or fade out. It is mathematically randomized, pixel by pixel, into pure digital snow.
Like an old television set on a dead channel. White noise.
Exactly like that. Kojima is visually turning information into entropy.
Entropy. That's a physics term, right? The measure of disorder in a system.
It is. The second law of thermodynamics basically says that over time, any closed system tends toward maximum disorder. A hot cup of coffee cools to room temperature. A sandcastle crumbles. Kojima is using this encryption as a powerful metaphor for time itself. Think about what happens to a historical event over 140 years.
Details get lost. Memories fade.
The physical details just dissolve. The exact texture of Billy's wool jacket, the specific way the light hit his eyes that afternoon, the smell of the gunpowder in the air, the sound of his voice, it all dissolves into the noise of time.
It vanishes into the binary void, as he puts it.
So when you watch that video and you see Billy dissolve into static, you aren't just watching a cool tech effect. You are watching a simulation of history dying. The material truth is being consumed by entropy, by the noise of time.
But the video doesn't just end in a screen full of static. The side images, the myth and the corrected truth, they start to come back, don't they?
They do, but, and this is key, they don't fade back in smoothly or perfectly. They are restored through a series of glitches.
Glitches. Usually, we think of a glitch as an error, a mistake, something went wrong, my Netflix stream froze, or character in the video game falls through the floor.
Right. Our entire experience with technology trains us to see glitches as failures of the system. But Kojima flips that idea on its head. He argues that in the digital age, the glitch is the primary mechanism of reconstruction.
Okay, unpack that for me. How is an error a tool for reconstruction?
Think about how we rebuild the past in real life. We don't have a time machine. We can't go back and see the real Billy the Kid. We have to piece the story together from fragments. A dusty court document here, a faded diary entry there, a rusted, scratched-up tintype that's optically reversed. These are all flawed, corrupted fragments.
So our understanding of history is basically like trying to read a corrupted file from an old hard drive.
Precisely. We are assembling the truth from a collection of errors, misinterpretations, and massive gaps in the record. Kojima is showing us that the after state, the history we possess today, is a digital ghost. It's a likeness that we've managed to recover from the void, but it's a likeness that is fundamentally built out of glitches.
That is surprisingly poetic for a bunch of binary code.
Yeah.
It suggests that the error isn't a bug, it's a feature of memory itself.
Memory is a glitch. It's an imperfect reconstruction that changes subtly every single time we access it.
So we have this visual of the dissolving and then glitching, reforming Billy, but there's another layer to the video installation that we need to describe, the lines.
Yes, the constellation. This is the central element in the second video of the Triptych series.
Describe what that looks like for the listeners.
So You still have this field of randomized, noisy pixels. And layered on top of it, Kojima uses an algorithm to pick 4 random pixel points on the screen at any given moment. And the code draws thin, sharp white lines connecting them.
So you have this shifting geometric shape, like a quadrilateral overlaid on the static.
A shifting, jagged constellation. It's in constant motion, constantly recalculating, finding new points, drawing new lines, disappearing and reappearing.
And what does that represent? It feels very abstract.
That is the network. And this brings us right back to our itinerant photographer from the beginning.
The pioneer social network.
Right. Back in 1880, what was the network? It was physical. It was the U.S. Postal Service. It was a Pony Express rider. It was a stagecoach carrying a leather mailbag with a tiny tintype tucked inside an envelope, moving slowly from New Mexico to a relative in New York.
A network made of mud and horses and steam.
But today, the network is invisible. It's fiber optic cables under the ocean, it's servers in massive air-conditioned data centers, it's algorithms. Those shifting lines connecting the pixels represent the invisible algorithms that dictate how we see the world today.
We aren't just looking at a static picture anymore. We are watching a dynamic calculation.
That's what Billy the Kid is now. He isn't a man. He isn't even a photo on a piece of steel. He is a packet of data. He is being processed, routed, encrypted, decrypted, compressed, and displayed by a global system that we don't even see. Those lines are the ghost of that system.
It really changes how you feel about the image on your screen. It stops being a portrait and it starts being a process, an ongoing event.
And that is very much in line with Kenji Kojima's background as an artist. We should probably touch on who this guy is because he's not your typical art school graduate working in a studio.
No, he's a coder first and foremost right now.
He's a self-taught programmer. But his interests are this fascinating fusion of the ultra-modern and the very, very old. He has a deep, abiding interest in medieval art materials, things like egg tempera, gold leaf, the chemistry of pigments.
Computer code and medieval art. That's a very specific Venn diagram.
But if you think about it for a second, it makes perfect sense. What was medieval art? It was about encoding complex religious meaning into a system of symbols. A halo means this, the color blue means that. And what is coding? It's about encoding logic into a formal syntax. Both are systems of encoding a version of reality. Kojima specializes in what's called bitwise operations,
which is manipulating data at the most fundamental level possible, the individual ones and zeros.
He wants to get down to the very fabric of digital reality to, as he says, decipher the chaos of reality. And the fact that his work is archived at Rhizome, which is one of the premier global institutions for preserving and showing digital art, validates that this isn't just a tech demo. This is serious art history being written.
So we've got the tintype, we've got the encryption, we've got the network. But I want to zoom out to the philosophical argument here, because Kojima makes a claim in his artist statement that is, well, it's pretty bold. He calls this entire process a digital reformation.
This is my favorite part of the entire theory. It's where he connects the 16th century to the 21st century in a really profound way.
He's literally comparing the shift to digital art to the Protestant Reformation.
He is. And to understand why that comparison isn't as crazy as it sounds, you have to look at the power dynamics. What was the Protestant Reformation fundamentally when you strip it all down?
Well, the history class version. It was Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to a church door. It was about breaking away from the perceived corruption of the Catholic Church.
But how did they do it? What was the mechanism? It was about access to information. Before Luther, the church held a total monopoly on the divine. The Bible was in Latin. Only the priests could read it and interpret it. If you, a common person, wanted to know what God said, you had to pay the priest to tell you.
They controlled the source code of salvation.
That's a perfect way to put it. The Reformation was about translating the Bible into the common tongue, into German, into English. It was about using the new technology of the printing press to decentralize that power so that anyone could, in theory, access the truth for themselves.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does that apply to the high-end art world?
Look at the art market today. Who are the high priests?
The big galleries, the auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's, the billionaire collectors.
The people who control the physical object. The people who can afford to spend $2.3 million on a single tintype. They hoard the original. They keep it locked away in a climate-controlled vault. If you want to see the truth, you have to go to their museum, pay their ticket price, and look at it through glass.
They control access to the Latin Bible.
Exactly. The entire monetary value of that tintype is based on its artificial scarcity. I have the only one, therefore it is worth millions. But Kojima is saying that the digital reformation completely blows that model up because a digital file
Can be copied
yeah,
infinitely.
infinitely and perfectly. If I email you the video file of binary interpretation of Billy the Kid, your copy is bit for bit identical to mine. There is no original anymore in the traditional sense.
So the very concept of scarcity, which the entire art market is built on, just evaporates.
It completely collapses. And with it, the power of the high priests of the art market collapses. The value is no longer in hoarding the object. Kojima argues the value is in spreading the idea.
Now, I know what some of our listeners are probably screaming at their speakers right now. But wait, what about NFTs? Non-fungible tokens. Aren't they literally designed to reintroduce scarcity and make digital art expensive again?
That is the elephant in the digital room, and Kojima's take on this is absolutely scathing.
Which is surprising because a lot of digital artists embraced NFTs. It was a way for them to finally get paid for their work.
True, but Kojima has a brilliant analogy. He calls NFTs digital wrapping paper.
Digital wrapping paper.
Yeah.
God, that is definitely not a compliment.
Think about what that means. The art, the digital file itself, is the gift. It's fluid, it's copyable, it's alive in the network. The NFT is just a cryptographically signed receipt that you tape to the side of it so you can pretend it's a tradable product.
So it's an attempt to force the old rules of the physical world onto this new, fluid digital world.
It's exactly that. It's the old guard art market trying to reestablish the priesthood. They are creating artificial scarcity in a world of infinite abundance. They want to turn art as signal into art as stock.
Art as signal versus art as stock. That really frames the conflict perfectly.
And Kojima's work actively resists that. He uses encryption to make the artwork an experience, a process. You can't really own the process of the one-time pad running on a screen. It's a calculation, it's a live event. The value isn't in a file hidden in a crypto wallet. The value is in the process of watching the myth dissolve and reconstruct.
So if the value isn't monetary, and it isn't based on ownership, what is it? Why should we care about this art? What are we supposed to get out of it?
Kojima proposes a new kind of value, one based on what he calls intellectual resonance.
Which means?
What exactly? It means the value comes from participation, from the dialogue it creates. We aren't supposed to be worshiping the metal plate in a museum anymore. We're invited to participate in a living binary dialogue. The image circulates freely, it mutates, it gets remixed, it gets reinterpreted.
It's democratic. The power is given back to the network.
Just like the tintype was supposed to be in the first place.
Wait, bring that back around. How is the tintype democratic?
Remember, the tintype wasn't for the rich. It was the people's photography in the 19th century. It was cheap, it was fast, and it was durable enough to be sent through the mail. It was a democratic medium of the frontier. The digital file is the democratic medium of the internet. We just got sidetracked for 100 years by this abnormal greed in the art market that tried to turn a democratic object into an elite commodity.
So Kojima is, in a way, trying to return photography to its populist roots, to make it a tool for communication again, not just a tool for investment banking.
That is the heart of the digital reformation.
Man, that connects all the dots so well. So if we pull the lens back as far as it can go, what does this tell us about America? Because Billy the Kid is a symbol for America in a weird way.
He is. He's the myth of the self-made rebel, the outlaw individualist, and the source material really digs into this idea of America as a digital globe.
Kojima suggests that America isn't a fixed destination, not a settled history.
Exactly. We tend to teach our history as a static timeline. A happens, then B happens, then C. Billy the Kid was a bad guy, Pat Garrett shot him, the end. It's presented as a finished product.
But Kojima says no.
Kojima's art suggests that America is a generative process.
Like the artwork itself, it's not a static image, it's a loop.
Just as the pixels in his video installation are in a constant loop, they return to their positions, dissolve into noise, and then glitchily reconstruct again, our cultural identity is doing the same thing. We are in a constant loop of encryption and decryption, of myth-making and myth-busting.
We're constantly rewriting our own story. Every generation takes the data and flips the image to suit its own needs.
And this leads to what the source calls the paradox of the age. Think about how much data we generate today. We have big data, high-definition video, surveillance cameras on every corner, satellites watching from above. We are, by far, the most documented civilization in all of human history.
We're recording everything, all the time.
And yet, the real Billy the Kid remains a secret, forever lost to time. And maybe the real America also remains hidden behind this overwhelming screen of binary noise.
We have more information than ever before, but do we actually have more truth?